All right, we have a handful of jumbo perch in the bucket, and we're gonna go through how to clean those. You can do a quick internet search and see there's a lot of ways to clean a jumbo perch. But I'm gonna go through my process, how I do it. One thing we could probably all agree upon is sharp knives and a clean workspace for starters. I got a bucket of water, I have some paper towel, an assortment of knives. Now, because I just have a handful of perch, I'm gonna use kind of the traditional, old school, if you will, knives. If I had a whole pail full, I'd break out the big guns and run with the electric and buzz them up real quick, but we'll get right into it here. Now, to make this process clean, I had bled these perch earlier. I have a little task knife here that works well for just bleeding them out and just notch out right under the gills. This will save on a bloody cutting board. They're pretty well bled out. The next step would just make sure you've got a couple of nice sharp knives handy. I like to hit them with a steel here a little bit just to knock the burrs down. I like a small knife and I like a long bladed knife for perch. Now, typically the bigger the fish, the bigger the knife. But for this instance, perch are a little different, and I like to start off with a small knife. Then when I knock the sides off, I transition to the big knife. So we'll grab one here. Now, when we're talking perch, we're talking about yellow perch, jumbo yellow perch. Now, what I like to do, lay my fish out, start with a small knife, and what we're gonna do is bring the fish all the way to the edge of the board. I like to work on a fish all the way near the board. That way my angles with my blade and everything, I can kind of clear the blade without running it into the side of the board. And it just makes for a lot cleaner process. We start back behind the gills. And I like to take my small knife, insert it, and curve all the way around the gills out to the bottom of that pec fin. And then I will continue that and go down his back. And I can kind of rotate it here so you can see as well. But typically I would run the fish parallel with my cutting board all the way closest to me, but for demonstration purposes, I will show it. I like to run that blade. And what you'll see is there's a ridge of bones in here. And about the time you hit the vent, you can poke that knife right on through and take it all the way down to the tail. And I do not blast straight through that tail. I keep that attached. Now from here, I'll flip the fish over, do the same thing. What I don't like to do is knock the fillet off of that one side, because then my fish sits kittywampus. If he's got a fillet sitting out here, that fish doesn't lay nice and flat. I feel like you can get the most meat out of a fish doing it this way. Do the same thing. Come through, pop out at the vent, and always hug that blade close to the spine. Now, if I were using the electric fillet knife, you can just come down and buzz it right off, and you can avoid all the trying to cut around the rib bones. But because I'm using fixed blade knives, this will allow me to not have to resharpen my knives as much by not running all the way through those rib bones. Now, we come down, we open that up, and we follow that rib cage all the way down the body of that fish. And there's a set of pin bones just on the top ridge of the rib cage, and you cut through those. You bring that all the way down to the belly. Run the blade right through like that. Now we do it on the other side. repeat the process. Perch are tough, so you kind of have to do a little pulling and peeling on them. They're a fantastic table fare. They're just a little more of a challenge to clean. And again, come right up the belly. And what you have is kind of a butterflied perch fillet. Now what I do from here is, if I were to have a whole bunch of them, I would take the tail, cut the tail off. And if you wanted to do a bulk load of perch, you could just set this aside and do this process all at the same time once you get toward the end. But what I like to do, like I said, keep that tail on there, bring your fish all the way to the edge of the table. And this is where you really want to bring it all the way to the edge of the table. And then this is where your big blade comes into play. So if I cleaned all 5 of my fish, I would set them in a pile right here. And then when I'm done with that process, then I grab the big blade, come over here and knock the sides off without skin. Now, some people, I understand, like to have their fillet, they'll scale their perch, but I don't do that. I just knock the sides off. Boneless, skinless fillet. Now, if you really get into some big perch, they've got a little set of pin bones, not really anything to worry about for the most part, but those lay right here. Typically, those will just fry right out. Cold water, typically the ice water tends to pull out the blood and some of the slime. It just makes for a nice, if you're gonna freeze your fish or eat them right away, it just is a nice way to get the leftover blood out. All right, so fish number 2, way number 2. Like I mentioned, we're gonna do it a couple different ways on cleaning these fish. I do like to start with the big knife in this version. This is where we're gonna run our blade right through the rib bones. Now this is gonna involve a little more sharpening down the road because you're just putting metal to bone. Like I said, having the good steel on hand is nice. Again, fish all the way to the edge of the board. I want a stiff backbone knife, something that's got a little more metal on it, something just heavier duty. We're gonna flip that fin over and we're just gonna come right down the side of that fish. And I like to stay to the rear of that peck and keep a nice straight line. And then what you're gonna do, you're gonna take that heavy blade and you're just gonna turn it right into that rib cage. And then follow that blade and that spine all the way down. You're gonna bring it all the way back. And like I said, I like to keep that tail connected. I don't like to knock that off entirely. The reason why is I don't have much for fingernails and I like something to turn that blade into to knock the rest of that meat off of that skin. So that's why I like to keep that tail on there. It just adds for a little more grip, something to just grab onto. Again, flip the fish over, same deal. Right behind the head, come right down back. You've detached the pec fins right there. Same thing. The trick is just following that spine. The closer you can follow that spine, the more meat you're gonna come out with. And if you like eating perch like me, I want as much meat as I can possibly get on these guys. Take that, knock it off. Now, like I was saying earlier, I have something to grab onto and knock the meat right off of the hide of that fish. But before I do that, one of the other things when it comes to cleaning the perch this way is you still have your rib bones right here, and you can hear them. And they're pretty heavy duty bones. Everything on a perch is relatively heavy duty. So one of the ways I like to do that, again, you can pretty much knock this all out with a longer fillet knife. This is more of a, I would say this is a faster way of cleaning a lot of perch. But one of the things I like to do to get those rib bones out is take the palm of your hand and you flatten out all those rib bones on your cutting board. You apply a little bit of pressure and the natural curvature of those rib bones flatten right out. That's where you can either use your palm or the back of your hand. What I like to do is apply that pressure, fold that skin up right here, and as you apply the pressure, you can see where those bones, where you would run your knife through those bones and you cut them off initially with that first cut. And what happens is when you flatten out those rib bones, you can slide your knife in there and knock them right out. And it leaves you with a really nice, clean fillet. Do it to the other side. You can see there's very little waste on those rib bones. This is toward the head of the fish, and this is toward the tail of the fish. Every one of those rib bones are knocked out of there. Do the same thing with the other side. This takes a little bit of practice, but this is one of the ways that I've come to learn how to do it. And as far as cleaning a whole bunch of fish, this is probably the quickest way to knock them all out of there. And then we'll go back to what I had mentioned earlier about giving yourself something to hang on to when you start to actually pull the skin off of that fish right here. And I do like a longer bladed knife when it comes to cleaning fish this way, and or bigger fish or panfish in general.
Why is that?
Typically when you have kind of what I would call a tubular fish, more of your walleye, perch build, your longer fish, even some of your pike, you can kind of get away with a little bit shorter knife. But those broader, if you start getting into 12, 13-inch crappies, those guys start to get tall. And that's where I like a longer knife for a fillet that's actually wider. A lot of crappie fillets are always going to be wider than your typical perch or walleye fillet. And having that fish all the way to the edge of the board, I can't emphasize that enough. You can lay that blade flat on the table and pull off all your meat, just pretty much in one clean swipe, versus having to flex your blade really hard out here on the edge of the table. And now you're kind of fighting your handle a little bit, and sometimes it doesn't come off as clean. So bring that fish all the way to the back, and it just is a real nice, smooth process. Clean perch. Now, like I had mentioned earlier, depending on if the pin bones bother you or not, if you have a really hot vat of oil, you can kind of fry out your pin bones. But we'll just do a version here where I take the pin bones out. I like to lay that fillet as straight as possible to mirror my fillet knife. And if you start at the head of the fillet and you slightly run your fingers down toward the tail, you can feel some little bones in there protruding up at you. So once you've located those bones, you can take your fillet knife, and you don't want a crooked fillet. You want to try and lay that fillet out as straight as possible. And then you take your long blade and you just feel, it's a feel thing. You run your fillet knife right down parallel to those little bones right there. You make a little slit about 3/4 of the way back is where they terminate. And you can peel those right out of there. If you take a cut and you go straight down toward your cutting board, and those are your pin bones right there. I'll throw those away with the rest of the carcass, and that's what you end up with, is a nice little fillet ready for the fryer. Last but not least, we're done with the fixed blades. We're gonna transition to the electric. Now, this I would generally use if I had a truck bed full of perch. And this is gonna be similar to what I had just showed you, where you run right through the rib bones. Again, I like to use 2 knives with the first version I showed you. I just find myself sharpening knives a lot less. But with the electric, same deal like the last one. Under your pec fin, and you make that first cut straight down to the spine, straight down to the spine. Turn that blade away from you and run it right down to the tail. And again, I like to stop before that tail, always. Fold them back, flip them over, do the same thing. Take the eggs and the guts. Come down, throw your guts away. So once I've got my bucket of perch with my electric fillet knife to this point, it goes right back to what I had previously showed you on how to take the rib bones out with the fixed blade. I apply the pressure, take the rib bone out, skin the fillet, and that is pretty much how I go about filleting my perch. So whether you like to use an electric fillet knife or a traditional fillet knife, a fixed blade, these are a few ways, probably some of the most common ways to clean a yellow perch. I would recommend, if you're just getting into cleaning fish or fishing in general, learn how to start with a fixed blade. That's gonna be the best bet. Learn the fish, learn the anatomy of them, and then you can kind of graduate your way up to the electric fillet knife. But these are the ways that I know best, and hopefully that helps you in the future.